There are plenty of people who are more educated and more qualified to talk about the problems in the United States education system today. However, this assignment isn't about me telling you about their points of view, it's about telling you about my point of view. And I see the problems in the United States education system basically divided up into 3 points. The first has to do with students, the second has to do with teachers, and the third is a broader cultural problem inherent in our society today. The first point, students. Now, what I'd like to talk about is less about student achievement or effort, so much as it is about the support systems that enable students to come into classrooms ready to learn. Now, let's reel it back all the way for a second, back to the very beginnings of educational psychology with Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. If Maslow is right, and everyone pretty much agrees that he is, then students who don't have their needs at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy filled, physiological needs, safety, etc., aren't able to engage in processes of learning that are linked to the categories of esteem and self-actualization. For example, let's look at how ethnocentrism plays a role in our classrooms. Now, ethnocentrism is essentially the idea that people who belong to minorities, who aren't white middle-class males, are disenfranchised somehow by systems within our society. Generally speaking, these systems would work to undermine individuals' fulfillment of low-level needs, physiological, safety, and love and belonging. And it's difficult to argue that something like this isn't playing a role in our classrooms. Take a look at some of these statistics. Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than white students, and Black and Latino students are half as likely to graduate than their white counterparts. Additionally, Black and Latinos make up 61% of our incarcerated population in the United States, which is disproportionate to their 30% of the general population. While these statistics are purely correlative, they do strongly suggest that there is some kind of systematic disenfranchisement of minority populations in our education system and in the United States as a whole. Economically disadvantaged students face similar difficulties. A 2011 article by Tanya Kent cites 2 studies that affirm that poverty is the single most significant barrier in educational achievement. In addition to these circumstances that interfere with Maslow's love and belonging levels of need, there are also often circumstances that interfere with the most basic level of need of all, physiological. Many students are showing up to school not properly fed and without access to adequate health care. If you think that something like this doesn't matter in the classroom, take a look at the World Education Rankings published by The Guardian in 2010. You have to go down 9 countries, to find a country that doesn't have some kind of system of universal health care in place and accessible to its students. The implications are clear. Students who are having their lower level needs definitively met are much more capable of engaging in the learning processes that are associated with the higher levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the question then becomes, where should students be getting these most basic needs met? In an ideal world, parents would be able to do it. In the real world, this doesn't always work out. When it doesn't, state programs should jump in to fill the gap. But state programs are also having some trouble meeting these needs. For evidence of this, let's look at some sobering statistics of the U.S. foster care system. First, a full half of young people leaving foster care at the age of 18 are unemployed within a few years. Another one, 70% of state prison inmates in the state of California are former foster care youth. There is a direct pipeline effect happening between foster care system and the penitentiary system. So, if parents aren't always successful and state programs are failing to step in, it often falls to schools to provide for students' basic needs. But schools are also often ill-equipped for the task. If Jonathan Kozol's 2005 account in The Shame of the Nation is any indication, schools often fail to give students any value besides their test scores, much less fulfill students' needs for physical amenities, safety, and love and belonging. This brings us to the second point of the problems I see as plaguing the U.S. education system: low-quality teachers. Now, contrary to popular belief, teaching is actually generally considered to be a respected profession in the United States. However, 60% of Americans still consider teacher quality to be a significant problem in the nation's schools. And in 2003, the Department of Education estimated that only 54%, barely half of teachers, met the basic standards set out by No Child Left Behind. These standards were, again, very basic. 1, that the teacher have a 4-year degree, 2, that the teacher demonstrate competence in the subject, and 3, that the teacher be certified to teach in that state. For all the flack that No Child Left Behind gets today, these standards aren't unreasonable. Why is it that only 54% of teachers are meeting these standards?
That's not good enough!
One of the reasons suggested by David Guggenheim's 2009 film Waiting for Superman is the due process clause in teacher contracts, often referred to as tenure. Imposed by heavy-hitting teachers' unions, this clause makes it all but impossible for administrators to dismiss even the most incompetent teachers. A 2009 article in the Los Angeles Times noted that fewer than 2% of teachers are denied tenure after the 2-year probationary period, with no meaningful process of critical review necessary to become a tenured teacher. With no effective evaluation system in place, objectively bad teachers can go right on teaching. The Center for Union Facts cites a Newsweek article reporting that only 0.1% of teachers were dismissed for performance-related reasons between 2005 and 2008 in Chicago, a district that has unequivocally failed its students. Only 28.5% of 11th grade students, that's less than 1/3 of 11th grade students in Chicago, meet expectations on standardized tests. Legislators are aware of this blind spot, but unfortunately, so far, all efforts to address it have failed. No Child Left Behind had the admirable purpose of holding teachers to a high standard, but unfortunately resorted to student achievement as the only means of evaluation. In practice, this effort to assure teacher competence usually turned into a system that put schools in a position where they had to put unhealthy pressure on students in order to ensure their own survival. Many critics of public schools try to illustrate the U.S. education system's inadequacies by comparing it to more successful countries like Finland or South Korea. I don't quite think this is fair. Why? Well, that brings us to the third problem with our education system, the cultural values specific to the United States. It's this idea of the American dream.
When you ask what makes us the greatest country in the world, I don't know what you're talking about. Yosemite?
The idea that you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The belief that effort is the only important element to achievement, and laziness is the only barrier to the pursuit of happiness. Because of our widespread belief in the individual's ability to succeed by virtue of perseverance and grit, aside from other factors like ethnicity or gender, we tend to insist that the playing field is essentially even, and resist any reform that tries to say, wait, no, it's not. Part of the reason we resist talking about it is that it can be embarrassing to admit our own positions of privilege.
We are 4 white straight people who are going to be talking about sexism, racism, and homophobia. Okay, we are less qualified than a lampshade made of toilet paper.
Another reason that it isn't often brought into open discussion is that people in positions of power often buy into what Sandra Barnes calls an achievement ideology. It's nice to believe that if you're at the top, you deserve to be there completely by virtue of your own merits. Unfortunately, this tendency tends to perpetuate the blind spots that already plague our education system. So, we make excuses. We shy away from putting more public funds into things like universal health care or public education by claiming that it's socialist. It impinges on my right to have my money go to my own direct interests.
You really have no clue what socialism is, do you?
Until we're able to let go of this ideology of pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, until we admit that the playing field isn't actually level, that there are barriers for ethnic minorities and low socioeconomic classes, those barriers will remain staunchly in place. Our idolization of individual achievement has also led to a climate of competition in our schools. After all, how do you measure achievement if not against other people? And this atmosphere of competition necessitates quantifying achievement on a common scale so that we all know our place. Standardized testing, anyone? Standardized testing has also had the unfortunate side effect of alienating some students by devaluing subjects that aren't considered part of the core curriculum. It marginalizes what students often believe to be the most important parts of themselves, parts that often aren't contained within that core. Incidentally, Finland, the country that most people point to as one of the best examples of an efficient education system, no ranking, no tracking, And most schools don't even use grades until the 6th grade. So we're left with these 3 different problems. One with students, one with teachers, and one with the cultural values we have here in the United States. So what's next? What do we do about them? Let's take them one at a time in order. First, we have to do all we can to ensure that students' most basic needs are being met before we're asking them to come into the classroom and learn. Wherever possible, this means getting parents involved in the students' education as much as we possibly can. Where this doesn't work, schools should also be pushing for outside reforms. Reforms to ensure that their students have access to adequate health care as well as proper nutrition. A good critical look at some of the social systems we have in place, such as the foster care system, could also be a positive step. Meanwhile, within schools, we should be doing what we can to foster safe, welcoming learning environments. This may look like refurbishing rundown school buildings, taking steps to address overcrowded classroom issues, or even ensuring that students have access to health care, following the example of Jeffrey Canada's Harlem Children's Zone. More often than not,
It's all about the money.
when it comes to addressing teacher quality, we need to look into alternative methods of evaluating teacher performance, preferably some method that doesn't put students in the line of fire, equipped with the power to ensure that teachers in the classroom are capable of performing to a higher standard. This may mean funding continuing training, it may mean more education for teachers, it may mean lessening teacher union power and giving schools the ability to fire incompetent teachers with more freedom. In terms of addressing the cultural values that have put our education system at a disadvantage on the world stage, there's only so much we can do. Really, the only thing we can do is be committed to continuing the laborious process of being honest about the problems plaguing our current system, things like ethnocentrism and the marginalization of the economically disenfranchised. These things will take time.